Hi, my lovely grandchildren. It's Nana, your storyteller, and I'm here to record another story for you. Like my background, it's called an aurora borealis, and it's cool. Night sky from way up north is where you need to go to see it, and I just thought it was fun. And I do have my hat this time for my story, so I'm getting a little bit better every time I record these. So this is a story, it's a legend, and it's a story that Lily has heard in her classroom. Mila, I might have told the story to you at your house, but I don't really remember, so it will be fun to have it recorded anyway. It's a legend. It's called The Legend of the Dipper. It's a story from the year 1915, and it was written by a woman by the name of Carolyn Sherwin Bailey. And I'll begin the story now. This is a story about a little girl about your ages. And this little girl lived in a forest, in the middle of a forest, in a sweet little cottage with her dear mother. And they were happy in that cottage. They were so very happy living together. And then, as sometimes happens in life, things changed. The little girl's mother became sick. Oh, she was very ill. She was so weak she couldn't get out of bed. She had a fever, had a high fever, and her throat was so hot and dry. She was parched. And she said to her daughter, "Dear daughter, please, please bring me a glass of cold, clear water." Well, the girl was a little girl, first of all. Second of all, it was dark outside. It was nighttime in the middle of a forest. And thirdly, the mother and this little girl did not have a faucet in their house where she could go and just turn the water on and get a glass of water. They didn't have any running water in the house. This was a long time ago. But the little girl knew, she remembered that there was a pond in the forest that was fed by a spring of crystal clear, cold water. And she decided right then and there that she was going to go and get some water from that pond, from the spring-fed pond, for her dear mother. And so it was kind of chilly, so she got a jacket on, and she picked up her dipper. And a dipper is kind of like a ladle, and you use it to scoop up something to drink, and you can drink right from the ladle, or you can use the ladle to pour into another glass. Anyway, she picked up her ladle, which was a very, very inexpensive tin ladle, and out the door she went. And she started down the path through the forest, and she was hurrying because she knew that her mother, poor sick mother, was very, very thirsty. And so she was hurrying along the path, and uh, she finally, I mean, it was pretty far away. She finally got to the spring-fed pond, and she knelt and she scooped up a ladle full of that cold, clear, fresh water, and turned and began heading home. Now, she was hurrying once again, and sometimes, when you hurry, sometimes you trip and if you're carrying something like a glass or a dipper full of water, sometimes you'll spill some of it. So this is what had happened with the little girl. She had spilled some of the water as she's hurrying along because she's tripping over rocks on the path, or maybe a tree root is sticking out and she trips over it. And so she'd spilled a good portion of the water when all of a sudden she felt something on her hand, and she looked down, and there, licking her hand with a hot, dry tongue, was a sweet little dog. And she knew that that little dog was very thirsty. His tongue was dry, his nose was dry and warm. You know how dogs' noses are usually kind of wet and cold. Well, his was dry and warm. And she looked at the ladle and saw how much water she had spilled out, but she just felt like she needed to give this little dog a drink. So she put out her hand. Where's my hand? Put out her hand, and she dribbled some of the water from her dipper into her hand, and then she held out her hand for the little dog to drink from. And the little dog began lapping up the water. And boy, you could tell right away the little dog was feeling refreshed. And it was as if he had been down to the pond and had drunk his fill. He was looking so refreshed, and off he scampered. Well, you'll never guess, but while the dog was drinking from the little girl's hand, in the other hand, the little girl was holding the dipper that had turned from that cheap old tin to a dipper of solid silver. What a miracle. And not only had it turned to solid silver, but it had once again filled completely up to the very tippy top of that dipper with cold, clear water. Well, the girl knew that she'd given the little dog a drink and he was okay, so she began hurrying once again down the path towards her cottage with her mother in it, and she was almost to the cottage when she looked up ahead in the path, and she saw up ahead a man standing in the path, and he was tall, and he was dressed all in these glowing white garments. His clothes were just glowing white. And she thought for a moment, she stopped and she thought for a moment, and she thought, well, I know Mommy has always said that I should not talk to strangers, but she also told me that I should always help those who are in need. And I can tell this man needs a drink of water. He looks very thirsty. And as she looked, he held out his hand towards her, towards the dipper. Where's my hand? This background can be kind of sketch. So he held out his hand to her, reaching for the dipper to let her know that he was very thirsty. And so while he was a stranger, he was also in need. And so she took her dipper, and even though she'd spilled some of the water again, she held it up to his lips to drink. And he drank and he drank, and you could tell that he was very thankful. He nodded his head and he smiled at her, and he tipped his hat, and as he was drinking from the dipper, it turned from silver to, guess what? Yes, it had turned from silver to solid gold. It was a solid gold dipper. And once again, it had filled all the way to the top with fresh, clear, cold, sparkling water. Well, the girl turned and immediately started running up the path, and she saw her cottage, and she ran up the steps to her cottage and opened the door, and she ran up to her mother's bed and held the dipper up for her mother to drink from the dipper. And as her mother drank from the dipper, well, it was as if her mother had never been sick at all. Her her fever was gone, and she was once more, she had energy, and she felt clear-headed. Her cheeks were pink once again, and she looked just the model of health. And she said, "Oh, dear daughter, thank you so much for that drink of cold, clear water." And then, as the mother and the little girl watched, the dipper started rising up towards the ceiling. And as it rose, it turned from solid gold to a dipper of solid diamonds, sparkling and shining in the night air. And it rose up to the ceiling, and up right through the ceiling, and through the roof of the cottage, and up, up into the night sky. And there, in the night sky, the dipper can be seen every night, shining as a remembrance for all of us down here of a little girl who was kind and thoughtful and giving. And that is the story of the Legend of the Dipper. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll share this story with someone else sometime. Thanks again, and I love you, and I'll see you soon. Bye.